Hello and welcome to Brand X Reviews. Today I'm going to be doing a mailbag question that Paul Cage sent in back in March, shortly after the announcement that No Time to Die had been delayed. Now, I did a video on that at the time and I've since deleted it because in sort of historical context there's really sort of no need for it because everything got cancelled after that. The fact that one Bond film was delayed really does seem kind of pathetic now in context of what happened afterwards with the lockdowns and so on. But for context, anyway, this question Paul sent in off the back of that story breaking. So let's have a quick look at this anyway. So 6th of March, Paul Cage. I'll just get the thing up now.
So given that in the new timeline, Bond has become 007 in 2006's Casino Royale, and now they are playing on him getting old and nearing retirement in the upcoming No Time to Die, do you think the new actor will carry on down the older Bond route, or ignore this and just carry on changing actors like the previous Bond films? Bond? What the hell? Bond films have done for another 50 years.
Even Bond films, what the hell? Paul Cage, seriously. You've done this before as well, seriously. Go to the end of this video and I'll show you the clip of last time he did that. James Bond, what the hell? Anyway, his question goes on. In Roger Moore's last film, he was past his prime and was simply switched with another actor on the same timeline, yet in this reboot, he is already played as being past his prime. So, it's a fair question, and I can't really answer it definitively. I mean, anything could happen. They could go down any kind of route. They could do a hard reboot. They could do a soft reboot. They've never done a hard reboot before as such, as in like fully forgetting what has come before, because they've kind of had throwbacks with the Daniel Craig era to the previous era. Not just little things like having an Aston Martin that's got all the gadgets specifically from Goldfinger. That wasn't just like a random thing. That was a 60s car with 60s gadgets that was kind of implied that was part of his past, which doesn't make sense. That's not really what I'm thinking. I'm thinking more the Judi Dench thing, which didn't make sense. The reboot didn't make sense when they included her in Casino Royale in 2006. Obviously, she played the same character she played in the previous 4 films that Pierce Brosnan was in, from GoldenEye 1995 right up till Die Another Day in 2002. She reprised her role in 2006's Casino Royale. So that would strongly stand against it being a hard reboot. Soft reboot, maybe not. We can say that it's a soft reboot. That's what I would call it myself. But it did make sense to have her in it because when we saw her in GoldenEye, she was the new M, and James Bond had been around for a long time. That was referenced specifically in GoldenEye. She said, "You're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, relic of the Cold War," that he'd been around for a long time and she was new on the job. Whereas in Casino Royale, she's been doing the job for a long time. She talks about how she misses the Cold War and all that kind of stuff. And James Bond has just started his job with Daniel Craig. Obviously, if you've seen the film, you'll know exactly what I mean. Casino Royale. So the continuity there didn't make sense, and even the director of Casino Royale, Martin Campbell, at the time did say specifically it doesn't make sense having her in this film given the kind of soft reboot that they're doing, but because she's such a great actress and because that character was so strong and she was so strong with it, it made sense to kind of carry her across. And I think with James Bond in the past, I mean, that was nothing new to the franchise in terms of having very confusing continuity in there. It wasn't the first time that they'd done anything like that. They'd got about 4 decades behind them of different actors carrying over different references from previous actors. Even, you could say, George Lazenby, the first replacement Bond that they had in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, one of the first things he says in the pre-credits scene is, "This never happened to the other fella," which was an in-joke. Obviously, it was a behind-the-scenes in-joke. There's all sorts of theories as to what it might have meant, if not an in-joke. But you're not supposed to overthink it. That's the key. I can't stress that enough. It's not just a kind of a throwaway, like, get out of answering the question. that's a fundamental answer. You're not supposed to take this too seriously in terms of continuity. I mean, in some franchises, it really does kind of mess things up. I mean, you could talk about the X-Men franchise. The continuity in that is just it's in an absolute mess. There's no real reason for it because it is supposed to be one franchise. Where at least with Bond, when they changed the actors fundamentally and introduced new storylines, at least with that you can say, well, it's kind of a reboot but not. Whereas the X-Men's never actually been like rebooted and their continuity's all over the place. So it depends on the franchise really as to what you can get away with. But at least with James Bond, because it's got such a legacy, and obviously not just because the actors have been replaced, but your James Bond films from the 60s are very different to the ones from the 80s, and that's only 2 decades apart. Regardless of whether the actor stayed in that role all that time, which wasn't the case anyway. It's a very different franchise by that point, so there's lots of different angles that you can come at from this. Obviously, your question about will the next James Bond actor, so whoever it is, are they going to continue the Daniel Craig soft reboot? Because it's the hardest of the soft reboots they've ever done, really, is the Daniel Craig one, because it's quite definitively a new James Bond. So it hasn't completely severed ties to the films that came before, but it's severed more ties than any other actor recasting of James Bond that we've had. I suppose the only other one that would be comparable would be the Timothy Dalton one, because obviously he was a lot younger than Roger Moore, so that was quite a jarring change, really. But at least with the Daniel Craig ones, we can say that is probably the most distinct reboot, if we're going to call it that they've ever done. So are they going to stick with that going forward? Are they going to have a James Bond that is maybe in his late 40s, early 50s going forward? I kind of doubt it, because I think they want shelf life with this thing. This is why I say Idris Elba, all stuff about him black aside, I would say would be a good James Bond, other than the fact that he's way too old. If you'd gone back 10 years ago, that sort of age that he was at would really be the kind of age where the actor's going to move on, let alone begin the franchise, and that's 10 years ago. So really they're going to want to have another actor with good shelf life. So really, I think if they'd recast, I think they would go for somebody that's maybe mid to late 30s, or a little bit older but looks younger, can pass for younger. Not that youth is necessarily a big selling point for James Bond as well. He's got to be kind of weathered a little bit as well. So who's to say, really? It depends. I think they will continue some of the threads from the Daniel Craig movies. I think that, especially casting-wise, Ben Whishaw as Q, and the other actors that have been in it is obviously M and Moneypenny. Whether or not they recast those, I don't know, but I think at least keep one, so that there is still a sense of continuity, even if it's not scientific, and you can't say, well, clearly it's a sequel to those ones that came before. I think they'll keep something, but I don't think they'll sever it completely, and I don't see why, like your question asks, why they would keep him as old and past his prime, like you say. Because going forward, it's not just for that first film that they do. They're going to want to have a story in that. They're going to be thinking, well, it'd be really helpful if this actor stays with us for at least a decade. So I don't think they're going to be wanting to have another 60-year-old James Bond like we pretty much had with Roger Moore. Having said that, I really like the Roger Moore films, the later ones in particular. I think those are some of his best. Not because he was older and that worked in his favour. I just think that they got better as they went along, especially with John Glenn directing For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy and View to a Kill, which is my favourite of the Roger Moore James Bond films. But anyway, that's pretty much all I've got to say. Let's ask Cor what he has to say about this, because I was going to get him on Skype as well and have a quick chat with him. And obviously, Paul, you're a big fan of the Cor as well, so here he is. Right, so we've now got the Cor on. Cor doesn't want the video recording, do you? Because you're a scruffy bastard, apparently.
Well, I'd also have to put pants on, and that's, not happening.
Oh, I'll be right. Paul's sitting out.
No, I'm joking. I am wearing pants.
Yeah, I'm not. I am really. There you
Well,
go.
first time for you in your videos.
Yeah.
We had you Willie hanging out in that thumbnail.
Oh, well, yeah, well, there was that, yeah. Anyway, so with the James Bond thing, we were just talking about how like continuity is going to work. I think we had a conversation about this earlier. You generally kind of felt the same, but what's your kind of take on like what the best thing to do would be, what you think they might do?
I mean, I'm not sure really what the best thing to do, but what I think they're going to do is just whatever works for the film in question. I mean, that's kind of how they've always done it with Bond. Like, if they've got an idea that works best with some kind of soft reboot or something, they'll do that. If they've got something that works with just continuing on, they'll continue on. I mean, even with them rebooting this, they've still, there's still like a soft continuity with the other Bond things because, there's like the old 60s Aston Martin and stuff in his garage and stuff.
Yeah. It's a fair point as well that you make there, actually. I didn't make that point, that it depends on the actual film itself, because Casino Royale wasn't just any Bond film. It was a very specific story. That was the first book. And that the rights to do that had just kind of become like, easy to go with when they made that film. It was a bit of a complicated situation, but yeah, so that in that case, it wasn't just it's a new actor, let's reboot it. It's a new actor, and we've got the first book to do his like first outing as well. So yeah, it's a good point you made there. Like I said, I didn't get into that. Depends what they've got in mind. We have no idea what they've got in mind, so it's difficult to say. The point I was making was I don't think that they will get an older actor and continue as if like it's still Daniel Craig's Bond and he's the same age, because he kind of did that with Roger Moore. He was like a couple of years older than Sean Connery, so effectively you could say he aged from Doctor No in '62 all the way up to View to a Kill, which was Roger Moore's last one in '85.
Yes.
He'd gone from being an agent in his like early to mid 30s to being like Roger Moore's age, where he was like near pushing 60 pretty much. So I guess the thing is with this, like I said, I don't think they're gonna at any point want to have an old man James Bond like actor. So I think that they would. I don't think that they would continue him as being old in that sense.
Yeah.
Well, who knows anyway? And it's not James Bond; it's James Bong.
Now. The new films are coming out. It's going to be Jane Bong.
There is that as well, yeah. There's the nonsense about a female James Bond, which doesn't even work. And specifically Bond, not like a 007 designation to a female. That's a different argument. That's not a James Bond film at that point. And I don't think that the universe of James Bond in the movies is strong enough to continue without him. It's not like X-Men. Well, you can kind of have it without Wolverine, I guess. You can't do that with James Bond. It's a Bond film. You can't do it without him. Well, you could.
Well, that's just it. I mean, there is some kind of general continuity with the world, like Spectre, kind of in the earlier films, and vaguely resurfacing for the later ones, and stuff like the kind of like Russian guys who were kind of the same throughout some of the films, with the whole like Spearman, Death to the West, and all that.
Mm.
But there was no like solid continuity where it's like, if you take Bond out of it, it'd just be any other kind of spy thing.
Because it's set in the real world effectively, with a few kind of like idiosyncratic tweaks here and there to certain like villainous like plot threads and stuff. It's effectively our world. It's a world of like international terrorism and global events on New World Order, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, just with a fantasy twist of like cool ass gadgets and impossible cars and shit like that.
Which dotted around the James Bond character. If you take that, it doesn't really work. And you'd have to have a pretty charismatic like female as well to be able to like step up into filling that specific role, because it's a man's role. It would be like having a woman that does something that exclusively women do, whether it's like ballet dancing or something. If you're going to have like a man do that, it would have to be a very feminine man. He would have to do a very specific role to do that. You can't just say, well, a woman can do what James Bond can do. Wrong. It's a completely different dynamic. Men and women are different in that way. You can't replace James Bond with a woman. You can't replace him with a dog. You can't replace him with a glass of water. it's very, very different. And that's not being sexist.
Mhm.
That's just, it is what it is. And it works the same way for women. You can't replace certain women with a man in certain roles. You couldn't do a remake of Terminator, really, and have it's not Sarah Connor, it's Simon Connor. He's the father. Very different dynamic there, because there was like a very maternal thing going on with the Sarah Connor character in that original film. So, it's just gender baiting, is that whole
I mean, I
concept.
certainly think that argument works better than the ballet dancing, because there are actually guys who ballet dance.
Yeah, but they'd have to be very good at it, is what I mean. You
Yeah.
couldn't a man, you know what I mean? You
But yeah, I
couldn't
mean, like, if you had like a female spy thing, it's like, well, we've had that quite often. That's basically what Alias is. Like,
a lot of them are
it's
good.
like a female Bond. It's like, well, isn't that Black Widow? Like, how is this going to differentiate itself? Like,
and there's
beyond like, oh, it's Bond, but this time it's got tits. It's like, okay, that's not really anything interesting, though, is it?
The thing is, as well, there's a difference between a woman being like Bond and actually being James Bond, or just changing the name to James Bond. There's a very big difference there. If you want to have a character, a female character like James Bond, do it. It's been done. A lot of them have been really good,
Well, that's just it. I mean, there are so many like films that are kind of knockoffs of Bond, where it's like, oh, it's it's a spy thing, but it's not James. I mean, like, that's basically what like Triple X and shit like that was.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah, but no, this time it's cool and extreme, and stuff like that. It's like anybody can do that. Like, why? What's the point of having like the James Bond like franchise and then doing your own like cheap ass, knockoff?
Yeah, essentially. And I better knock this on the head, because video's gonna be quite long. If it's too long, I'll just cut it down to 2 parts, if you're right. But all good points. So you've made a shitload of points as well that I hadn't even thought of going into. So again, that's why I wanted to bring you onto this. Nothing but the best for Paul Cage mailbag.
Also, you've got to have me on, because otherwise, who's going to call you a bastard? You bastard.
Yeah, it was Adrian, one of our watchers, one of our viewers. He said that's one of your finer points, that you always call me a bastard. Oh, there you go. Anyway, right. Well, I'll cut it short there. Thanks for the cameo from the call, and we'll see you next time.
It's pretty much that I get. So, and they're all great as well. So keep them coming, Paul. But seriously, before I carry on, can you get your spelling checked before you post these things? Because unacceptable. This one, you're going to see what I mean, guys. Here we go. In celebration of Spectre being released, can you walk us through all of your... God. James Bong. James Bong? Really, Paul? What the hell? James Bong. James Bong merchandise, DVDs, Blu-rays,